the breaking news last night, we've learned that Iran and the United States, both sides, have signed the 14-point MOU, Memorandum of Understanding. And finally, we get the text, we get the document, because both sides, release that document. So when it comes to what has happened so far, I think looking at the 14-point plan, you may see many people would argue that it was a huge defeat for the Trump administration, for the United States. But in my opinion, this is the reality of the new world we're living in. You cannot have slaves anymore, because all these things that are happening in this memorandum of understanding, by the way, it's not a deal, it's not any sort of agreement, it's a path, it's some sort of a starting point for the two sides to
Yes.
come together and to talk. This is the main point. But the whole foundation of what's going on is what was, I think, the whole foundation of the slavery, how the slaves came out and said, we are not slaves anymore. We want to have our rights. This is what's going on with, to my understanding. But going to the what's going on with the 14-point plan, the main point, the first point is talking about Israel and Lebanon. Not only Israel and Lebanon, but Iran and the United States. Looking at what has happened, what is your understanding? What do you make of the current situation between the two sides?
I will agree with you, Nima, that this is the reflection of reality. Simply, there was no military victory, which is what made this whole war so hard to understand. Why on earth did Donald Trump go ahead to attack Iran together with the Israelis? You and I spoke up until maybe a week or two before the war, when it became obvious. I was saying there's no way, nobody's that dumb, but I was wrong, and they went ahead with it. And the reason why I thought that they would never do it, because it's very obvious that Iran has escalatory dominance in the region, that they have been preparing for this conflict for 20 years, that they have all kinds of ways to hurt American interests in the region, that they could very likely even be able to evict the United States military presence from the region. So it was all downside. It was all downside risk with upside only for Israel. Israel would be, if the war were successful, the main beneficiary would be Israel, and then City of London and Wall Street. And the United States doesn't really gain anything from this, other than having to police the region still, which is, a heavy undertaking. I was wrong. So this went on for 3 months. I think that the United States and Israel tried everything to avoid this kind of a ceasefire and MOU, the whole framework, because as I see it, it is a massive capitulation for the US and Israel. Because let's remember, 3 months ago, Trump was saying unconditional surrender. He was demanding unconditional surrender. He was going to nominate the new spiritual leader and the new government for Iran. They were going to take control of the Strait of Hormuz. They were going to take control of Iranian oil resources. They were going to deprive Iran of its ballistics program, their main defensive deterrent. This one, they're lifting the naval blockade. They are allowing Iran to export oil again. They are unfreezing $24 billion of Iranian money, and they have agreed to a framework for reparations, which is not going to be cash turned over from the United States to Iran, but they have agreed to a $300 billion fund for reparations and for reconstruction of Iran. This would be the first thing that the United States normally wouldn't allow. They would basically freeze that, sanction it, not allow anybody to invest a cent in Iran. Now they had to climb down from that position. Trump himself, in his first term, imposed maximum pressure sanctions on Iran. So all of this has been thrown overboard. And so it's hard not to see this as a defeat for the United States and Israel, and a victory for Iran. Now, that in itself makes the whole thing a little bit suspicious as well, because who knows? Maybe they're going to use the 60-day window, the 60-day ceasefire, to prepare for the next attack on Iran. But I think that Iranians themselves are not naive. They understand this, and so they will be preparing. But what I found interesting is that Trump was kind of asked how, why this radical change of position, and he said that they were 4 weeks away from running out of oil reserves. So if that's true, and I don't know if that's true because Trump said it, it may or may not be true. That would be a massive. That would be a massively important factor. But then there was also a statement that came from Israel, so carried by Al-Mayadeen, the former commander of Israeli Navy, said that, I'll quote the statements, I'll read it from the Al-Mayadeen English. Quote, "We have seen what even limited Iranian missile strike barrages can do. The damage here in Israel is enormous, enormous. A significant portion of this damage is not visible to us, and we are not aware of it due to military censorship." So Iran has been very, very effective in striking US military bases and targets in Israel. And I think that this has taken the Americans and the Israelis by surprise, because these strikes were extremely accurate and extremely destructive. And so carrying on a military confrontation with Iran was obviously hurting the US and Israelis much more than they were able to hurt the Iranians. So what do? The more you carry it on, the more you get beat up and weakened, and the more your negotiating position deteriorates. So I think that this is part of that reality that you said. I think that they found out the hard way about Iran's military dominance and their military power and their escalatory dominance. And so at that point, there's nothing to, unless you're going to go to nuclear weapons, there's nothing to do but to throw in the towel, to tap out, and to say, okay, enough.
Yeah. I think Iran has never been one of the, major geopolitical issues for the establishment in the United States. They wanted to manage Iran since the revolution has happened by using Israel, by using GCC countries. But that's why I think the case of the use of nuclear weapon, that's going to be the ultimate, for the ultimate enemy, for the ultimate cause. It's not going to come to what's going on, because the main reason, let's remember what has happened with the case of the foreign policy of the United States for many years. Just recently, we've heard from Antony Blinken, from Hillary Clinton. She said that Benjamin Netanyahu, was asking her many times that the United States has to attack Iran. They have to do this and that. That's going to help the United States in the region. That's going to bring some sort of enormous leverage for Israel. This is the whole plan all the time. This is the, if you were to mention one single dream of Benjamin Netanyahu in his whole life, it was the attack on Iran and putting an end to the so-called regime in Iran. And he got it from the Trump administration. So the difference here is that two factors, in my opinion, that are of particular importance for the Trump administration. One of them is the economy, and the second is the stockpile of the United States during the war. These were huge. These two factors were hugely damaged by the war. It wasn't a long war. You remember, 39 days of war. So that wasn't huge. You get into a war that you don't know what the main objectives. Let's go after the main objectives. What was mentioned? They didn't mention it officially, but they were asking for no enrichment on Iranian soil. They wanted to put, some sort of restrictions on Iranian ballistic missiles and no nuclear weapon. They talk about Iran, the Iranian support to the as they call so-called proxies, Iranian proxies in the region, because Iran is supporting them. These were the agendas on the part of, basically, I haven't heard particularly from the Trump administration, but Israelis were so vocal about what were the main objectives. So and Benjamin Netanyahu wanted to sell that he wanted to convince he convinced the Trump administration, if you get in, you do regime change, you're going to achieve all of them, all those objectives. And here is Donald Trump. What would be the solution for him? He's in it, the Strait of Hormuz is closed, no regime change, no enrichment, that no enrichment policy is gone. Ballistic missile is not part of 14-point plan. Nothing of those objectives were, somehow accomplished by this war. So there is no good option for Donald Trump. What else can he do?
Yes, indeed. I believe, Nima, that Trump probably has had enough. He wants out. And at first I was very skeptical about these reported this reported acrimony between Trump and Netanyahu, but it seems that it's real, and we can see that by the reactions from Israel and Israeli supporters, who are borderline hysterical about this. I mean, they are now comforting themselves by discussing war on Turkey and or Egypt. They have to comfort themselves. Somehow all they know how to do is kill and destroy. So I guess if they're not allowed to go kill and destroy Iran and Lebanon, well, then Turkey will have to do. It's complete insanity. So I thought it was, I think this is a very, very hopeful moment. And I thought it was very interesting that Trump praised the role of Russia and China, because he said that they were neutral. I don't know that they're neutral. They're practically allies with Iran. They provided intelligence to the Iranian. They provided radars, satellite imaging, I think certain kinds of anti-aircraft, anti-ballistic missile systems and so forth. So not exactly neutral, but he gave them this praise, which tells me that maybe there has been a certain level of coordination between the American side and the Russians and the Chinese. And it always takes me back to what Sergei Karaganov said a few months ago. Well, more than a year ago, he said that we see our role with the Trump administration as helping the United States transition from the global hegemon to a normal global power in the least disruptive way imaginable. And then I always pay attention to how the Russians and the Chinese are reacting to the United States. And they have been very restrained. They haven't criticized Trump too much. But on the other hand, they have made it clear that they support Iran in this conflict. And so it seems to me that they must have helped persuade Trump to climb down, and that they will probably play an important role in the creation of the next new security architecture in the region. And so I think that this is the next stage, which will depend on whether the Israelis, whether the Zionist interests will be able to sabotage peace negotiations, whether they will try to again assassinate Iranian leaders. I think this is the reason why the document was not signed in Geneva, but it was signed virtually. It was they both Pezeshkian and Trump signed real hard copies, but Trump was in Versailles, which is interesting, and Pezeshkian was in Tehran. So nobody had to travel, because who knows, if Pezeshkian traveled to Geneva, who knows whether he would come back.
Yeah. I think you mentioned the role of China and Russia, which is important. We know that Pakistani government has a good relationship with China, with Iran, with the United States, with everybody. Basically, they were going around and talking with Chinese, with Iranians, with Americans, and we had you remember, Iranian foreign minister going to China, going to Russia, talking with them. It was
Exactly.
a total cooperation, when it comes to, because these countries are reshaping the whole calculation, in my opinion. And just today we've learned Chinese foreign ministry said the cooperation with Iran will deepen, and China and Iran are comprehensive strategic partners and will continue to advance their comprehensive strategic partnership. It's going to be $400 billion, and they're deepening that. So everything, I think, is reshaping. And Donald Trump, how do you see the way that the Trump administration is somehow perceiving that, or is getting there? Because looking at G7 and the summit of G7, what is your perception of the today? He comes into the meeting, he says, "I'm the boss, I'm here," and he goes around and sit. And he says, "I'm the boss," but when he laughs, he smiles after that. He knows that those things doesn't exist anymore because the world has changed somehow.
Yes, Nima, I think I'm still very, very mystified by what possessed Trump to even go to war against Iran. I mean, that was so insane that
I think it's going to remain in the history of the United States, this war.
Yes, yes. And somehow Trump was persuaded to go ahead with it. Even though we remember that in 2019, there was great pressure on Trump to go to war against Iran. And he said no. And that was a big scandal at the time. It was a long time ago, but it was quite a scandal. And so he knew not to go then. Well, he went ahead now. Something happened. I don't know that we might never know what happened, but at least from what we heard from Trump himself and from Marco Rubio, they went to war for the benefit of Israel. They were dragged into it by the Israelis. Okay, let's pretend that that's true. So if Israeli influence was the defining feature of this war, then Trump must feel very angry because he has been misled. If that were the case, He has been betrayed, lied to. Benjamin Netanyahu, who I've always said I don't buy this idea that Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu are great friends. I always thought that since Trump's first term that Trump doesn't like Netanyahu. Maybe he hates him. So what was it? Anyhow, whatever it was, Trump said like, okay, I'll go, I'll participate in it, and he betrayed his base. He alienated a lot of people who were his supporters, like his passionate supporters, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Tucker Carlson. Oh God, like a whole bit. Now I'm blanking out, but like there was a whole Tulsi Gabbard, maybe. There was a whole number of people around him that seemed genuine, authentic American patriots whom he suddenly alienated. And he was surrounded with nothing but zealous Zionists. And so everything went very badly for him, a few months before midterm elections. So he must be furious at the Israelis, at Benjamin Netanyahu, at this whole Zionist cabal surrounding him. According to Tucker Carlson's testimonies, he's aware that these people actually don't like him either, that they hate him, and that they have manipulated him. And so by now he might feel outright vengeful, not just resentful and hateful towards them, but maybe even vengeful. And at the same time, the Chinese, the Russians, they've been restrained, they've been constructive, they've been friendly. And I think that they may very recently, if this wasn't all overwhelmed by Iran war, very recently in the news cycle, I think the Russians are actually starting the construction work to build the tunnel under the Bering Strait. So the Russians are not letting go of the spirit of Alaska. They still prioritize relations with the United States. So the idea that they want to manage the United States, help it transition to being a normal power, all of that is going on. And I think that in all these contacts that have been going on intensely behind the scenes, that all of this has come back to Trump, that he's aware of this. He's like, gosh, that was a mistake to go with the crazies. But the doors were not slammed in my face by the other people. And so I think that this has forced Trump to eat humble pie and to question who are his friends, who are his allies, who is the constructive sides and who are the crazies. And so it hopefully strengthens the multipolarity, the Belt and Road Initiative, the BRICS, whatever's remained of it. And it makes those forces stronger, and it makes the imperial Zionist conspiracy weaker. And that's that situation, Nima. But the situation in the UK and the situation in Ukraine is very much related. 2 days ago, what is it today? 18th. Yeah, 2 days ago, we had the release of the rape gang inquiry in England, which I think is going to turn out to be one of the pivotal events in the 20th century, in the 21st century, because it could completely overturn the order in the UK that has continuity since the Glorious Revolution in 1688. And the bomb just exploded 2 days ago, and now the British people are starting to digest it, and you can see the anger mounting, and there's no more denying it. there was this consistent attempt to deny it by saying, "Oh, if you talk about the grooming gangs, you're a racist. You're stigmatizing the Muslim population." Blah blah blah. Now it's finished. That whole thing is over, and the problem is so deep. It's so deep. It permeates practically the whole of the British establishment, because the cover-up was run by two prime ministers, Gordon Brown and Keir Starmer. Mainstream media said nothing in 2 days. The royal family said nothing in 2 days. I think the British people are about to explode in anger. And so what happened? The day before the inquiry came out, British Royal Marines boarded a Russian vessel in the English Channel, a provocation. And then the next thing that happened, a Russian frigate came, and then like a private speedboat went and targeted the Russian frigate, which fortunately didn't lead to an incident. But then this morning, Moscow wakes up to practically apocalyptic scenes of the biggest yet Ukrainian drone attack. And so the skyline of Moscow is just like black smoke. And it seems to me that the British are desperate now to get some kind of a big war going, to provoke the Russians, because at home, the situation is on the verge of a revolution or a civil war. And the system is completely losing legitimacy. And, the Middle East in 2019, it was the British leading the pressure campaign on Trump to go to war against Iran. The British are leading instigators of war in Ukraine against Russia. They signed the 100-year partnership to provide drone technologies to the Ukrainians. So the Russians know perfectly well that it's the British behind all this drone warfare against the Russians. And by now, the British are not even bothering to conceal it, because they want the Russians to react and begin a bigger war, to deflect attention from domestic issues and to turn people's anger towards an external enemy. So it seems to me that everything is coming together, and that this must be discernible to Trump. And he has to make a decision what side he's on. Because if you're on the side of Israel, you're on the side of the global empire. And then you're against Russia, against China, against Iran, and so forth.